Welcome to another edition of Speak Up Presents. Tonight we're going to be talking about who controls your news. And with us, we very fortunately have Patrick Montega, the owner-publisher of La Gazzetta newspaper. Welcome, Patrick. I'm glad you could join us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
Mitch Perry, who is a political columnist. Do you call yourself political or just
Yeah, News and Politics editor is my title.
Okay, News and Politics editor for Creative Loafing newspaper. And Bob Darden, who's our only PhD on board here, but we're not going to call you doctor no matter what.
Thank you, Lou. I appreciate that.
He's the chair of the journalism department at USF in St. Petersburg.
Journalism Media Studies.
Journalism Media Studies department at University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. Welcome all of you. And all of you, one of the reasons all of you were invited is you were like myself at the April very not well advertised FCC hearing that took place a few weeks ago at the University of South Florida about extending or relaxing more the curbs, if any exist still, on media consolidation and merger. So let's talk about that. Media consolidation, merger. Can you sum it up, Bob, a little bit? What we've seen in the last, 20 years, is it?
Well, since probably about 1974 is when the rules on cross-ownership, what we're talking about are the ability of companies to own newspapers and television stations in a single market. And over the years, that rule from the FCC has been, I guess, debated hotly. And we had hearings about 2 or 3 years ago in Tampa, if you recall, widely attended, a lot of focus on that. And then we had this workshop where FCC is looking at revising its rules. They look every 4 years at a lot of their policies, and they're having a look at this. Although I think just a few months ago there was a federal court decision that opened that up, suspended the rule that forbade some of that cross-ownership.
Cross-ownership, we have it right here in our market.
We
and
do.
it got grandfathered in, sort of, correct?
There's what, 15 or 20 markets in the country with that have cross-ownership?
Well, we have the Tampa Tribune, and it owns a TV station, radio too, right?
And
it did. No, it doesn't.
It has the web presence.
TVO.com.
And the
WFLA Channel 8.
Channel 8.
And a host of smaller newspapers.
And the Tribune, all in one building, all under one roof.
But since 1974, or in recent years, we have the latest numbers I hear always are 85% now, with consolidation anyway, 85% of the media is owned by 5 or 6 companies now. And they are all cross-owning, right? Owners, right?
Well, this is consolidation, which would be a bigger issue or a bigger picture. The cross-ownership is in a single market. Consolidation means that any large media company or any media company can buy, as many properties or buy a lot of properties. Like Gannett has 100 and something newspapers. The latest figures on media ownership in the United States is something like 5 major corporations own 75 or 80% of all the media in the country. Some of those are in single markets, but many of them aren't.
So some of them affect this cross-ownership,
Absolutely.
but not all.
Not all, correct.
Okay, so what's your take on this, Mitch?
Well, it is interesting. The professor mentioned the fact that there was hearings here 3 years ago on this, which I know, Patrick, you would testify there at that. I just recall that it was a real big deal at the Tampa Bay Performing Arts Center. And we, as I was working at WMNF, of course, and we made a big deal about it. Just like MNF did broadcast this actually on their HD3 channel this past last month. But you mentioned the fact that it didn't have good advertising. That's probably the case. But I gather somewhat that it's a changing world. I mean, obviously it is, but in terms of the people, the concern out there about this issue of cross-ownership. We've just seen the industry and newspapers just change, probably for the worse in the last 3 years even. The Tribune, a lot of people thought they were going out of business a year ago. And in all the news pages, my paper, the Times, the Tribune, are much smaller. There's not as many pages anymore, basically. There's less advertising. So the issue of cross ownership is still very important and very relevant, and the fact that there might be more of that going on is something to be concerned about. But I personally, because I talked to the people when they were doing this thing coming up, and they were talking about me being a panelist. I'm glad that that didn't happen. I don't know. I'm kind of mixed actually on how I feel about all of that right now. Not that my feelings are that significant, but in terms of how it affects all of us as consumers of media and the like, if that's a horrible thing. I mean, I don't know. I don't know at all if the Trib wasn't owned by Media General, which owns TBO and News Channel 7 or 8, excuse me, that they'd be, around. I don't know. Maybe they would be still, but I think that, the newspapers are just, many of them in the cities have gone. Seattle, other places have gone out of business. That's pretty shocking. I think who would have thought that, 10 years ago? So.
You think it helps them to stay in business?
I don't know. I don't know, but
that. What about you, Patrick? You really.
I don't see how just getting bigger makes it better, because what happens is when you're getting bigger, you're also starting to have people who have ownership of newspapers that don't understand them, don't care about them. You used to have ownership of newspapers that were families and communities, and they owned them not only for money, but they owned them for power. Now the people who own newspapers are looking at a profit margin that they want to wring out of them. And sometimes those profit margins are standards that just can't be met. Wall Street doesn't care whether Tampa has a Tampa Tribune in it. They don't care if there's competition here. They don't care that the Tribune's going to support the Buccaneers or anything else. All they care about is that there's a 20% profit sent up, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. So I think the problem with cross ownership is that a lot of times they're not making good decisions for the product. They're making good decisions for the conglomerate. And sometimes if that decision is to sell off chunks of the newspaper and to strip it down to its bare bones in order to make the television station more profitable or to do an experiment on the internet, I think they'll do it.
There was an interesting point that the Media General guy, wasn't it the Media General guy made, that said that now that we have TV and radio, everybody's learning different skill sets, and we've reduced staff. So now we have, and you brought up, I believe, Bob, that doesn't always make the news that we receive better, just because a reporter now can not just write for a newspaper, but write for internet, which is a different sort of writing, but also pick up the camera and shoot, and then, be the audio expert at the same time, doesn't necessarily make for better news for us to get. Isn't this all impacting our news? I mean, whether it's cross-ownership or consolidation or any of these issues, haven't they impacted how much news we're getting, and fair news and balanced news, and hate to use that term, but...
Fair and balanced?
Yeah.
His argument was that his reporters were learning a wide variety of skills, and you can't argue with that. They are, because they're being pressed to do a lot more things. I recall as a journalist in the 60s and 70s that if I picked up a camera, I'd have been drug out of the building by the union, because cameras were for photographers, and writers did their thing and reporters did their. It just wasn't you couldn't do the other one's job. Now everybody has to do everybody else's job, and I understand that. That's the way things are going. But one of the arguments is, well, this is better news, and everybody's got an idea of what good news is. What people like to read, they're getting more and more of. But I think news organizations have responsibilities that go beyond just, if people just want to read celebrity news, I don't think a news organization should provide just celebrity news. I think they have a responsibility as a news organization to provide things that people need to function well as citizens. And I'm not sure that just teaching people a whole range of skill sets and setting them out to do 4 and 5 different things every day to keep the web updated and is giving us the kind of news that we as people need.
All right, with creative loafing, I'm kind of two different things. I'm a blogger. I'm responsible for putting up certain posts every day on political and news stuff in the Tampa Bay area. But also I write 1 or 2 pieces in our paper, our old-fashioned hard copy paper, once a week, where I can get kind of investigative and take a few days to work on something, which is nice. But so I'm very conscious though of internet stuff and like what goes up there, and it is so much. Now they don't tell me what to do, especially on the internet. And sometimes on the paper, I have to be told like we're doing a special issue on the beach this summer issue, so write something on the beach. But I'm noticing this more and more, and I've seen the more popular sites, news sites like Huffington Post is one of the most popular news sites, and it's shot up. But it's got your political news on one site, it's got your celebrity, your sex on another. And I'll be honest, when I first started Creative Loafing, they talked about how, well, we have a sex editor, right? We have an editor for green, for environmental news. We've got, I'm just, do the hard news. We're introducing a sports page. But the sex and the celebrity and the internet, eyeballs are seemingly all that count. Now, not for everybody, I mean, the New York Times and some other people, although, by the way, they're going to start charging in January, which is probably a good thing for them. But I do find that you're right. You talk about more news or more information out there. Yeah, there's more than any. You can find out stuff that you can never have found out. Obviously, with the flick of a BlackBerry now, right? It's incredible. But is it really good and important information? I mean, I love the paper, the St. Pete Times, right? It's one of the finer papers in the country. And they put all this other stuff though on. And you know what's funny, Bob? You mentioned this. I wrote this in my blog post. Tom Scherberger, an editor of the Times, took umbrage when you talked about Whoa Mama. They have a blog about, I guess, moms, which by the way I'm told is really popular. And again, some of these websites do that because we want to get young women looking at this stuff. And Tom got a little like, what's he got a problem with Whoa Mama? And but it's not hard news, which I mean, it's where I come from. It's like it's what I want to go get. But they're going to put up there what the people want, and that is different. And again, people argue, hey, it's better than having these certain guys up there just deciding what your news is here. I guess there's something argument to that, but I don't think it's a good trend for, good, hard-hitting, investigative, local news, which is more, well, that's what we can do. The local papers can do. Patrick's paper, and is write about local things. That's what you can't get necessarily anyplace else but on the ground in your city, and that still has value, and that's certainly something that, I'm trying to do here, but I just know that being in this internet world, which I'm in now in terms of writing, which I wasn't 7 months ago, I know how much it is about how you how you write a title, to get more eyeballs to look at. And I want people to look at my stuff too. I mean, I can't really make it that sexy because I'm writing about,
So now you're a title writer too. You're a headline writer too. Which used to be its own position, was it not?
It was.
Right, there's an art to that too, and I've never really done this until the last few months. Now I'm kind of getting the hang of it with some of this stuff. But I do, it's kind of weird, actually in a way, because I'm trying to think I also want to make it exactly what it is here, but also if I can, I don't really think of spicing it up because that's not really how I do stuff. But I want to make sure that the words in there, I guess certain words maybe, depending on who you're talking about, have more. Like I never write about Tiger Woods, but right, supposedly Tiger Woods, everything about Tiger Woods is huge. You just put that in your blog post and it's about something else. You'll get.
You're going to get a hit on it, right?
We pay people, we pay contributors. Based on their hits they get. For people so people say they want to write for Creative Loafing, we can say we can get you set up. We can't. If you get the paper, we'll pay you. But if you get X amount of hits, we'll pay you a little bit of money. So there's that profit margin put in there. I mean, it's really changed the news, how people are doing the news now. Not so much at the still establishment, places like News Channel 8 and the Tribune and the Times, but for the internet, it's really changed it, which is where more people are reading.
Yeah, and Patrick talked. When we were talking with the FCC, this is all about their concern was with localism and diversity, and I think Patrick brought out how we're losing localism in terms of the diverse voices because some of the bigger places, like, for example, the Tribune, have entered the field of, the minority publications.
Well, having size helps when it comes to being able to knock on somebody's door, get them to listen. And what happens is that we end up with some unfair competition where the Tampa Tribune, backed by a television station, backed by a Spanish newspaper, backed by 14 smaller newspapers, an internet site, goes into the door of a car dealer and says, listen, we can handle everything. We'll give you one bill, we'll take care of everything else, and it's easy, and it's quick, and it's simple. They even do this with government. I've run into FDOT where I've said, you've been running ads in another newspaper. Yeah, well, it was easy because we only get one bill. I said, well, did you find out if it was the best thing for the FOT to reach out to the public. Well, no, but it was easy. You know, we didn't do a bid, we didn't do anything. It was just easy.
Oh, so that's one of the ways that they might have entered that market, just to be able to get those dollars.
Right, because you
Because
already,
you are forced now to-
knocked on the door of the English, because the FDOT has to run an ad in the Tampa Tribune. So then Tribune says, well, since you're already in our door, now since you also have to do it in a minority publication, why don't you do it in our minority publication? And life is easier. You get one bill, no problems, and nobody fights it. So you end up with this. You also end up with the fact of people saying, I'm going to give you value added. We'll give you the internet for free, or we'll give you a Spanish newspaper for free, or we'll give you a local Temple Terrace newspaper for free. So you pay for the Tampa Tribune ad, and you'll get all these other things for free. Well, if you've got a competing newspaper in Temple Terrace and you knock on somebody's door and you say, listen, I saw you had an ad in my competitor, I'd like to give you a price. And they said, well, their price was free. Doesn't leave a whole lot of room for competition. So these are some of the things we face. Now, why should the public care? Well, the public should care when the Tampa Tribune is going to be the only one in town who is going to decide what news is, and who is going to decide what politician they're going to say is corrupt and what politician they say is going to be great. And this isn't even going to be a Tampa decision. Virginia, which is where a Media General is headquartered, can make a call down and say, listen, you guys are going to say Sarah Palin's the next president of the United States. And whether it's good for Tampa or not, whether Sarah Palin is for drill, baby, drill, at the end of the day, the Tampa Tribune would have to say, we endorse Sarah Palin because she's the best person for Tampa and Florida. And that's the problem here, is that you can't have local voices helping to influence the local community on what is good, what is bad, trying to point out these things. And you even find it with minority publications when they start to cross over. Where if the Tribune's going to own a black publication and a Hispanic publication, CBS owns a Hispanic radio station, you know, do you think CBS executives really care about the Arizona law? Do you think it really matters to them? So what is their station going to do on this thing? Are they going to ignore the issue altogether? The Tampa Tribune Spanish newspaper has no editorial voice because the Tribune won't allow them to have an editorial voice when it comes to politics.
Are they just actually rewriting news that's in English? Or?
No, they send out reporters and they do some local stories. I mean, it's not a bad publication. The problem is that it isn't an additional advocate for the minority communities. Minority papers should be advocates for their community. That's why they're a minority newspaper. If they weren't, then they should be a majority newspaper and not worry about advocating for their minority community. But generally, that's what minority newspapers do. And you know, I take offense when somebody wants to come in and take the money out of the community, but not put their name and their reputation online to fight for that community. I take offense to that.
And Louise, let me address a couple of points Mitch made. He I think very accurately noted that this this recent workshop was not. You said it wasn't well publicized, and it really wasn't that well attended. And one of the reasons is because in the hearing, you remember the crowd we had at the hearing.
We had people come down here early. You know, I was trying to think back to that.
But
the Consumer Union came down. The
Well, this
Media
is my
Democracy,
point.
Free Press Net came down.
That's right.
They came down weeks ahead of time.
That's right, they did.
And said, guys, there's
But-
going to be an FCC hearing. Who do you want to talk to? So we sent them out. And
That's right. And this time they didn't. And they didn't because they were focused on the net issue, net neutrality issue. That's where they had put all of their resources. We had one person down here from Prometheus Radio. All the rest of those major resources were focused on net neutrality. This has sort of fallen a couple notches. It's still on the website there, in those websites, but it's not something that they promote. The other issue is another cross-ownership thing about what can happen in communities. Well, I think still to this day, a traditional newspaper, what they call the legacy media, is still one of the most important, is probably the most important media unit in a community. If your name gets on a blog, well, you know, people will say something. But if your name gets in the St. Petersburg Times, if it gets in the Tampa Tribune, you get a lot more response from that. You get people come to you and say, hey, I saw your name. You know, I saw what you said in the Times. It doesn't happen often on the blogs, and it sometimes doesn't even happen on TV, but if it's on a major local TV show, it does. When one person owns those media, the major media in a market, and let's say they have a grudge against you, or they have a particular leaning where your organization is concerned or whatever. They remain the major organizations in the community to bestow power, to bestow status, or to take away power and to take away status. And if it's one person owning that, if the Times own 3 or 4 major media in St. Petersburg and the Tribune owns the major media in Tampa, if you're not in with the Times or you're not in with the Tribune, or Lord forbid, if they're against you in some way, I mean, you could be dead in that community. So there may become a time when the web is going to be far more important in people's lives than it is now. But now I think it's still the major media.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why the reformers and the critics out there are fighting to keep, most of them are fighting to keep that cross-ownership rules from being relaxed permanently.
What are the odds?
I think Mitch is probably right. The odds probably aren't very good right now. I mean, even this is what, a democratically controlled FCC now, and I honestly, I really don't think they're that particularly interested in fighting that battle.
I mean, you hear people talking about it's not going to happen, but you know, a bailout for the newspaper industry, right? I mean, you know, people talk about everything's being bailed out, but because the newspaper industry is somewhat in crisis, and you know, we all think, I you know, agree exactly what you just said, Bob, about how important, you know, I deal with politicians certainly around town, and you know, the Tribune, the Times, editorial pages are still very influential, too influential perhaps, you know, and so
locally, absolutely, for sure. I mean, for local races. Right,
exactly, absolutely. So, but you know, the cross-ownership rule, like I said, I'm just going back a few years ago. I mean, so many people, more people cared about it. You mentioned net neutrality or whatever it is. I just think it's also because people, I mean, really, the Tribune had to write an editorial last year before they said, you know, there's a rumor that we're going to fade out of business after the Super Bowl. You know, in January 2000.
There are rumors, that's
yeah,
true.
Yeah, and it was, and people believed that rumor going in. It wasn't like it came out of nowhere. People are looking at the paper getting so much thinner. You know, what's going to happen here? And so that is one example. They're hanging around. They're still a conglomerate, though, so let's not, you know, cry for Mother Trib. But the point is that you know, news is really, it's not a cliche. I mean, it's so different these days. And you know, I remember watching a documentary a few years ago that talked about, well, we'll look at this in 20 years from now, and this could be either like, this could be the twilight of newspapers, or this could be this weird interregnum period. You know, we just don't really know at that point. And I don't know if we still know right now. I do know, you know, my old employer, WMNF Radio, more than ever, I think, and this was mentioned at the FCC hearing, you know, is that, and also SLR, right, WSLR in Sarasota, right, you know, community radio stations like that, which are not every place has something like that, really more than ever has to be cultivated and you know, taken, you know, MNF had a tough fundraising period just a couple weeks ago, but it's still on the air, you know, 31 years, because that is really a heart of, you know, local broadcasting and getting people to get on here, like you do here at Speak Up Tampa Bay. And these things are more important than ever. And I know, we all know that the problems this station has had with local government and the like, and in Florida, you know, it's amazing, it's terrible. But I think that these are things that we have to almost like make sure we don't lose. I mean, so to me, I almost don't want to, you know, cross-ownership is important still, don't get me wrong, but I just think these other things, we've got to make sure to nurture them as we change in this media environment. Like, we don't know where it's going to go.
You know, the part of me, after I was listening to those guys at that workshop, was maybe they made a mistake getting on the internet bandwagon, the whole bunch of them.
Well, they made a mistake getting away.
Yeah, free. That's a mistake they did.
Well, yeah, and it's not free, right? Because all their, well, okay.
Well, yeah, it's
they get on it, they get on the internet bandwagon, and this is the demise of their newspapers.
Right.
I mean, I just wonder. I mean,
There's
did
just
they
no
have to go
long-term plan. No long-term plan of how to
No,
convert.
let's hurry up. We better jump on this.
Yeah, of how to convert hits to money. You know, they saw that their internet revenues were rising. Well, they were rising because they started at zero. So when you double that and you double that and you double that, you still don't have
Well,
anything.
you brought out an interesting point at that one event I saw you at, where you said people were considering the internet to be free because they weren't counting the money they were already spending on office space, computers, and reporters, and all of this, and their overhead on the internet. They thought, oh, that's,
right.
We're paying for that with our newspaper, and that's that. This is free now. We just have these guys translate what they're doing.
If you were to look at the Tampa
But-
General's,
Media General.
General's employment on their internet site, you would find that they've had a huge increase over the years as they've lost a lot of their employees in the print. But when you look at the percentage of where their revenue's coming from, it still isn't coming from the internet side. It's a grand experiment that somehow a lot of smart people have decided to continue down on, even though they have no idea of how they're going to make a dime. And now those revenues are even starting to decline. They've plateaued. The value of internet advertising is starting to go downhill as Madison Avenue is trying to figure out what ads really work on the internet and what doesn't work, because not everything does.
Right.
And I think most of it is still run by traditional journalists. I mean, they still are the ones that get the news and report the news and write these significant stories that then spread throughout the internet in terms of opinions on blogs and debates and arguments and all that stuff.
They're copied over and over again.
Well, not only copied, but they spark all these discussions. And the interesting thing is, that's the part that's shrinking. I mean, a lot of those people are being, if you look up at the Tribune's offices, even the Times has laid off any number of people or has had reduced its work staff by however means. But that's happening all over the country. So where most of the news is coming from, those groups are shrinking, whereas the internet, more and more opinion on the internet is growing, but that opinion, for the most part, comes from print journalism.
It's always been like that. In the short 15 years that we've had the internet, it's only been since 1985 we've had it, but it's absolutely true. And that is, again, what to do kind of thing, because there's ProPublica, there's a couple of places where they've spent money to fully, spend money on reporters and do original reporting, but they try to get it, ProPublica, I think they have their own website, but they try to get that in 60 Minutes or the New York Times or some other respected source, out there, because even if you have a website that just, like say ProPublica, which is you never heard of until a year or two ago, people aren't gravitating to go over there. Maybe if they read a story in the Times, wherever it says, ProPublica
You have to validate it through the newspaper and through
exactly right,
through
and
television.
that's even something I've learned. Even WMNF, for example, which in this community is a big deal, right? We have so many stations in any city. You only have a couple public radio stations, and on the internet where there's a billion websites, so it's like, I'm trying to create a loafing, like, people who care about news in this town, they'll go to the Times, they'll go to TBO.com. You will. You're in front of your computer trying to make people want to go towards creative loafing, and see what we've got going on there, because in the internet you're one of 5 billion sites that people can go look at, and it's important to try to make it a destination, but it's very hard. But the time to Trib get that natural readership, because people, they respect them. They can see that paper. They don't buy the paper anymore, but they go online and read it for free, but they're still reading their news.
And I feel that's really different too. We're going to take just a quick PSA break, and we'll be right back. And I think we should talk about that, how we read, what we read on the internet is so different than the way we would have read a newspaper. We'll be right back. Stay tuned, please.
G morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me back. Hey, did you tell your parents about us? Let's skip first period together. Did you get all my texts? Is practice over yet? Where are you at? Are you with your friends? That's L-A-A-A-A-M-M-E-E-E. Capital X, lowercase o, capital X, lowercase o. I love you. JK, I hate you. JK. Are you ignoring me? We're in a huge fight right now. Is this something I did? I can see your lights on. I'm coming over. What'd you dream about? Me? I'm lonely. Holla back. Holla back. Let's try something new. Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
Hands can do incredible things. Now they can even help save a life with hands-only CPR. If you see an adult suddenly collapse, just call 911 Then push hard and fast in the center of the chest until help arrives. Learn more at handsonlycpr.org.
Welcome back to Speak Up. We're talking today about who controls your news, and we have with us Patrick Montega, the owner of La Gazzetta, Mitch Perry, the news and political editor over at Creative Loafing, and Bob Dardenne, who is the chair of Journalism and Media Studies over at the University of South Florida. So we were just talking about getting our news off the internet, and one of the things I notice is that because it's all sectioned off for me the way it is, so I could, if I'm on, I don't know, SP Times, for example, I could just go to your blog if I want to on Creative Loafing, but I can just go to Hillsborough County and then just read Hillsborough County, and then it's sectioned. So I'm interested in politics, so I'm going to go to politics. Maybe I'll look at education news and maybe a couple other things, and that's it. So what I'm missing now is when I used to hold a newspaper in my hand and I went in and read the jump or something, I read the front page. Well, I'm reading the front page, but I happen to see this story over here that I wouldn't have read, and it's really not on Hillsborough County, but it's on a national story, maybe with a local twist. Or I'm reading some story and I go on the jump, and pretty soon I'm reading some story that, I don't know, it's about oil spills, maybe dolphins or whatever, something that, no, I wasn't going to go look at a newspaper for a dolphin story, but I happen to be in there. I notice I'm getting less extraneous trivia, or less knowledge of odd things that I wouldn't expect. Am I right about this, Bob, that I'm losing something with this?
Well, I think it's, what is it, serendipity or something like that. It's, a lot of people have argued that because the internet is so focused, you can focus on any, if you wanted to, you can have things sent, to your box on
Right.
yachting, and only that. If you go to any website, you can search and you come up with only those things in which you're interested. And the argument would be, before that, as you said, you had a newspaper or even television, and you were essentially forced to see things that you wouldn't seek out if you had the chance. I mean, you didn't have the chance to seek it out. It was there. So when you turn the pages of the newspaper, not only do you see the ads, which is also helpful, but you see other things, and something catches your eye. That headline that somebody else wrote for the reporter, that catches your eye, and you read it. The argument has been, online you don't get that. And so what people have said is that we lose a common base of information, that if everybody focuses on just the thing that they want to focus on, and you come together and try to argue or debate or negotiate or discuss things, there's no common ground for discussion. I only know what Rush Limbaugh tells me. Patrick only knows what Al Franken tells him. How in the world are Patrick and I going to come to any kind of negotiated agreement on anything, any compromise about anything? I mean, one is just completely focused on one thing, and somebody else is completely focused on something else. So that's been an argument about getting news and reading news on the internet, as opposed to having a so-called mass media where you get exposed to a lot of things you wouldn't seek out.
Something else you're also seeing are people who are only receiving editorial. They have no news to judge their editorial by. They're watching a Glenn Beck or a Rush Limbaugh, and they mistake that this is only that this is
they
news.
think it's gospel news.
But it is editorial, and editorial is fine. Editorial is fine if you understand the issue and you've read the facts about the issue. Editorial is a great place to go to get enlightenment on perhaps a way you're not thinking about anything. But only editorial by itself is a dangerous thing, and that's what you see. The other part about, you get a lot of people who say, well, I get all my news on the internet. And what you find once you start to talk to them is that they get no news. They just think they're getting it on the internet. When I think Editor and Publisher did a story a couple years ago where they looked at the people who read the New York Times spent about 15 minutes a day with the New York Times. The people who said they got their news from the New York Times website spent 15 minutes a month. So, I mean, what we're talking about, 30 seconds a day worth of news that you're getting if you're if you're using the New York Times.
We've become our own TV station.
Right. Whereas 15 minutes a day of browsing through the newspaper, you're probably reading two or three stories in full, and then you're reading a bunch of headlines on the others. But, you know, you have a chance to build up some news. What I find when you find people who really are just getting on the internet, they're very focused on one item that they want or two items that they want, and then they really aren't getting any news at all. They're getting, you know, little Twitters and tweets about news, but that's about it, you know?
Yeah, sure. And how much can you say, as I noticed today when I was trying to come up with the tweet for this show, in 140 characters, and tell them what channels we were on, and tell them they can get us on the internet. We have a caller. You're on Speak Up.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
I'm calling because, you know, I've been listening to the conversation about newspapers slowly becoming obsolete, and I was just wondering, because it just may seem to me, and I could be wrong, and maybe one of the panelists would be able to give me the information, but it seems that perhaps the younger generation is more in tune with what's going on in news and politics now because of the internet, do you think? I know that when I was younger, I didn't read the newspaper. I didn't have time. You know, I had to go to school. I never bothered with newspapers. I barely watched news. I never knew what was going on in the world. But it just seems that the younger generation, you know, is, you know, has that information quicker and more ready for them on the internet. And I was just wondering, do you think that the younger generation is more in tune with what's going on in the world because of the internet? Thank you so much.
Good question.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that because I will disagree slightly with what Patrick said because I just know a lot of people who definitely read news and they don't read the paper anymore though. They literally, I mean, they still do get their news, but they, you know, and as the caller says, and the caller may have a, you know, BlackBerry or an iPhone, and because I see all the kids younger than me who've got these things, they're much more, you know, navigated better than I do, and they get a million different things on there, including news, including absolutely news, you know. So are they more informed? I think some are probably because it's an easier way to access information. But you know, it's funny because newspapers, right? You know this probably, Bob. You know, they've been going down in circulation for like ever, basically. Their heyday was like the 40s or 50s. So it's always been like this. But now we have something else that picks up. If you can look at it that way, you know, versus people that stopped reading the newspaper. Now people are looking at. I don't know what the percentages
Yeah,
are.
first they did blame TV, didn't
Right.
they? Really.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. And then we had radio first, and then TV. Right?
Well, and everybody said there would be a demise of radio when TV came,
Right,
and then
right.
Well, none of the old media ever disappear when the new media show up.
yeah, they keep
That's
on.
always
Yeah,
been the
keep on
case.
trucking.
They alter, you know, when TV came, they just took all the programs on radio and moved them right over, except for a couple, and the networks and everything else all became TV. So radio went to music, and that's happened throughout. This, however, is the first medium, if you want to call it that, has the ability just to incorporate all the others. The internet does.
That's true. You can have audio.
On the younger folks, they do get a lot more information. I honestly believe they are exposed to more, but it's I don't know how much they know in terms of the depth of the information they're exposed to. Because, as you say, it's.
But the problem with investigative, or the decrease in investigative, you've been to those media reform conferences with me. There's a blame or credit given to why we entered Iraq, how Bush won the second term. Because there wasn't the investigative reporting going on. No one really realized there were no weapons of mass, I mean, there's still a lot of people who believe there were weapons of mass destruction, blah, blah. But there wasn't enough of that investigative arm out there that was going to tell us, look, no, this is not happening, or there were other reasons why we may have gone into Iraq that had simply nothing to do with
well, see, that's
9/11.
one of the functions of journalism is not only nationally but regionally and locally is to perform that function that citizens can't do for themselves, and for the most part bloggers can't do either, and that is find out what happened and why things happened, and to dig a lot deeper than just 140 characters or you know, an update on an accident or something. You get a lot of that on the websites. But investigative reporting requires good, experienced, skilled, expensive people for the most part. Many of those laid off.
And you've got to have a lot of employers who are willing to let you
The time.
have the time.
Yeah.
And
And you
not
gotta
only
have
that,
an-
you cannot sit behind this machine all day. You got to just get out and go look.
Shoe leather,
because
baby.
Plus, you have to have an employer with enough money to be able to fend off the threats, at least, of lawsuits and whatever. I mean, I think, and this is where I'm not really entirely sure how my thoughts are developing along these ways, but I think you need an organization or a network of organizations that has a pocket deep enough to be able to not be threatened every time somebody says they're going to sue you. Because, I mean, if you're a two-person organization and you do an investigative story, I mean, all somebody's got to do is sue, and then you got to go to court, and what finance, unless you've got a lot of money, that could kill your organization off right away. Whereas the New York Times, St. Petersburg Times, Media General, all those folks, they have the pockets. They could, if they did the investigations, they could fend off those suits, and they have. Well, they have for decades and decades. They fended them off. These smaller organizations can't. The next thing, though, those students, those young people who are getting the news, they're getting it from the press. I mean, they're not getting it from reporters and, who are going out from websites. It's still the traditional press that's providing it to them. So I don't think they get a lot of depth, and the stuff that's coming to them is still coming from the traditional media that's continuing to lose money.
The problem they're going to have is that as newspapers struggle more, who is going to be posting this on for young people to read? If young people will not pay for the news,
That's right.
eventually they won't have the news.
That's
And
right.
so these younger people are supposedly informed are creating a system that is not sustainable.
Okay, we were talking about that earlier.
But remember,
right?
subscriptions never paid for newspapers' business
Right.
anyway.
But advertising
ever,
did.
ever.
Advertising
But
did.
still, when you
Although
look,
classified advertising, even more than
Sure.
display advertising.
But you still look
paid
at
the freight
newspapers, and
on
they're 80% of these companies' revenues, whereas the best, the internet's doing 20%. So that 20% is never going to pay for the kind of reporters it takes to generate any news.
So you have to pay. Basically, the answer is not that people are going to do it, is to charge on your websites. That's the answer. Whether
But we
people
don't
think
want that. We want
Right.
we want the internet to be free.
Right.
I mean, we all do. We'll all yell.
Well, the internet can be free opinion. It can be free opinion. It can't be free, though, I don't think it can be free for news, because somebody's got to pay
gotta
people
pay,
to
right.
collect that
The
news.
big problem is we've trained everybody that it is free.
Right.
That's
I
the
mean, so
problem.
there's a huge day of reckoning here and a lot of pain and suffering that's going on because, you know, like I said, none of these, if Creative Loafing closed down its hardcover, I don't know if they could pay you. I doubt the percentage of what
No, they couldn't, because
no.
I see our ad guys, and it's all mostly about, I mean, that I think they know of.
Sure.
It's all about, and you know, TBT, by the way, is a thing that's really affected creative loafing over the last few years, because TBT with the kind of the, what do you call it, type of paper?
Tablet.
Tablet, exactly. You know, those, they took, you know, all those ads that used to go to creative loafing, so it's about ads, and that's why creative loafing's had troubles over the last few years. But you know, I really do think that's the answer. Now, like I said, the Wall Street, very few people charge. Hardly anybody charges, right? Wall Street Journal is charged for, and you can get some of their content for free, but most of it, half of it, you have to pay for. The Times has announced that in January they're going to charge, and they haven't announced the kind of the pricing structure yet. But I'll tell you what, I will pay for it. I don't think it's going to be that more than $20 a month. That's what I'm guessing. I'm a just junkie for the New York Times. I read it every day. I used to get it to my house, and then when I moved to Ybor and they would kind of redline that area, they wouldn't send it out to me there. So I'll read it for free online because you're allowing me to do it. But I will do that. But there's only a few other places. I mean, I talked about this with Adam Smith once. Maybe the Buzz blog, because people, you know, who are into political stuff, that would be almost worth it for them. Again, depending on how much you charge. But maybe not. Maybe if you charge like, you know, $10, nobody would pay it, and they go, geez, what are we going to do? So you're absolutely right, Patrick. It's been trained. It's been all a bad way, the way it's been set up. But to go forward, you know, it's like, I don't know how benefactors are going to write checks to companies. I mean,
Well, but the biggest problem was when we, you know, gave the AP and that to you know, Google and the
Yeah.
rest of them. Once they had that, then it was all downhill from there. And the newspapers still have control of this situation. They could still take it back.
they could.
If they
Rupert
wanted
Murdoch's
to.
talked about doing that.
But when you also talk about
Take
young,
it back? How would
Yeah,
they
won't
do that?
allow you to go on Google. Won't allow Google to take your news.
no, yeah, the newspapers still control their content. They can say overnight, you're not getting any of it.
They probably, but they don't really want to in a way because I mean it gets
It's driving them to your site, and then you're getting at least some eyeball.
But one day the newspapers have to realize that
Right.
driving them to your site isn't paying anybody.
Right. It's not
You know, that's the problem. You know, at the end of the day, the little people who give away chicken at the mall eventually have to sell some chicken. If they just give it all to you on a toothpick all day long and you never buy anything, they're going out of business. And that's what we're doing. We're giving people the chicken on a toothpick.
Terrific metaphor. Should be a writer. Maybe should think about being a writer.
But when you talk about young people getting more news, and this lady calling, they might be getting more news, but they still don't seem to take the relevance of it. When you look at the upcoming elections, we're going to be sitting with a electorate that's 60 years old, 59 years old, 61 years old, and you know, these are the people who are going to elect our school board officials, they're going to elect our county commissioners, they're electing our congress people. So no matter what the young people are doing on the internet with their news, obviously it is not affecting their voting habits and not arming them to be an effective piece.
This last president we just got in, excuse me.
One president, one presidential election.
Hey, that was a really big deal.
It was a big deal.
Is that not a big deal?
We haven't had a national election since that, so maybe we should wait to see. I mean, I agree with you. We're not going to have, you know, 2010.
Does anybody expect 2010 to have the same voters as okay, well then what's the issue?
But maybe 2012.
So we have to find some new minority every presidential election, some new exciting.
Well, this is a minority.
That really wasn't the minority situation, I don't think.
It was exciting.
But that was added to part of, you know. It was significant.
Yeah, years ago.
It's like watching Tiger Woods rise. All of a sudden, not only do you have a great golfer, but you have a great story and a new face and a new race. And all of that adds excitement. And frankly, McCollum and Alex Sink and Charlie Crist aren't going to do that.
Now, Rubio, you know,
This new guy got in the race, too.
Right.
What's he
Who?
the other day?
The money guy.
Scott, yeah.
oh my God. Or how about Jeff Green in the Senate race? These people have a lot of money, actually. With those, in fact, Rick Scott, go on Facebook. Rick Scott is everywhere on the internet. In fact, he's bought ads on Creative Loafing. Actually, he is everywhere. And that's actually, you know, the guy's got 24% rating, you know, against McCollum's 37 last month. Unbelievable.
And he just got started.
Nobody's actually reading anything about this guy whatsoever.
Exactly.
You know,
That's
it's interesting.
scary.
I remember years ago that the Tribune, I think it was the Tribune, ran a story about, you know, voter apathy and blah, 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 blah. And I wrote a letter to the editor, which got published, which said, forget that. How come we don't have any people running for office that are where's the inspiration they can give us? And that's what I think Obama had.
And that's what we need
Yeah,
more of.
we had who inspires? They all sound the same. I mean, truly.
That's why I was trying.
Politicians all sound the same.
They don't have any inspiring
And for
candidates.
some reason, we're getting way more attention from them just before a race than we ever got from them. You know?
Well, they're all covered the same. I mean,
it's the same old baloney all the time. So, you know, it's a question of not being actually
But
able to
politics
trust all
is an
that.
entertainment sport, and that's what young people
Well,
have
that's
to
where we
realize
have
is
to-
that
we
this
have
is
to-
our democracy, it's our country. If you want to be entertained with it, great.
Well, they
but at
mocked
the end of the
Obama
day,
a celebrity, right?
these people are deciding who's going to drill in your backyard and how fast you're going to drive and what you're going to drive and if you go to war. So if you're waiting to be entertained, great, but you really need to be a participant in this thing no matter what.
Well, you're so right. Literally, I haven't even thought about it like that in terms of the lack of charisma of McCollum and Sink. You know, these are people. I mean, you know, we cover them, and it's like, God, you know, it's just.
It's like,
yeah, I mean,
I know.
Bud what's his name? Bud Childs may run against Alex Sink for governor. I mean, you know, he's probably getting it very late, but he's not inspired by Alex Sink. I mean, he's a pretty solid Democrat. I mean, they don't really turn people on. Bill McCollum, my God, this guy, I'm just shocked he's still doing as well as he did.
But we don't have the kind of media that drives them. I mean, you used to have to go out and watch somebody do a stump speech. They could inspire you. Now they get 30 seconds on TV to shock you, to awe you. Nobody is actually asking for any inspiration here, and we're not in a format where you get inspiration. You know, how does this guy Scott go up to 24%? He has some ridiculous little statement he throws out there on TV that catches your attention
You're
for
right.
a second.
That's pretty sad. Seriously.
Well,
That's not inspiration, but obviously it's something.
It's like entertainment news, as you said. It's gimmick.
Yeah.
You know, it's gimmicky. But we're winding down, and I just really wanted to go back to the subject that we were selling here today with our show, which was who controls your news. And we did talk about a lot of us making, you know, errors probably by, you know, getting the same source every day or not actually looking at, you know, news that is maybe different from
Right.
what our own opinion is. And I just wondered if you'd all address how we could better control our news. Like it is being controlled by huge companies on the, for the most part, anything that is credible legacy-wise. And then we have all this other blogging and other things going on by the internet, and the delivery of the content is coming to us in all sorts of ways on my BlackBerry, etc. But are we really getting the best that we can get of different opinions so that we form some kind of a, you know, an educated...
I think it's up to the viewer, the reader, right? We do have more choices than ever. It can be our choice as to get liberal news, quote unquote, or conservative news. It can be our choice, or it could be our choice to inform ourselves by, you know, but I don't know if people do that. I mean, I don't know if people do that, quite frankly. Obama mentioned this in his speech, actually, was it a couple weeks ago? He actually said, if you're, you know, you should listen to, right? He mentioned some conservative host, actually, to listen to. If you know, I mean,
You know who used to say that all the time? Ben, who owned your paper.
Is that right?
Ben always would listen to opposite news.
Well, I certainly do that.
Yeah,
you know, I worked
he
at
just-
M&F, which is a conservative leftist center, and I got abuse from people because I get the Wall Street Journal and watch Bill O'Reilly. But I did and do still. I mean, I do because I want to know what those guys are talking about. It's important to. But you know, that maybe because we're in the business. Maybe for regular people, they don't have time to do that, and they just want to get what they.
Well, part of it is that you can't just assume that because people are saying they're fair and balanced, they are. If you go out and you find different sources, you create your own fair and balance. And I think that's the mistake is that too many people out there are just trying to find the network to do fair and balance for them, the paper to do fair and balance for them. You know, the wise people I know in this community, they get the Tribune, they get the St. Petersburg Times, they get, like I said, they get the Florida Sentinel Bulletin. They get a wide variety of information from a wide group of people, and they end up having the information at their hands to make good decisions. They create a fair and balanced situation themselves. If you're going to watch back, then watch somebody else, read something else. If you're going to read the Wall Street Journal, then get the New York Times. Create your own fair and balance. That's what I would recommend to people.
Well, that was my part of my point at that workshop is that in a way, yes, the corporations do control the news, but really if people tell the corporations what it is they want to buy. And the reason you see news for, you know, mothers and children flourishing, and the reason you see celebrity news flourishing, and the reason you see less international news and less investigative reporting is that people have said they want the information about celebrities, they want information about mothers and children. They don't particularly want investigative reporting because they don't pay for it. They don't want international news because they don't pay for it. So in some ways, it's the people themselves who control the news and not so much the... I really don't think there's any way the government can legislate good news and fair news and balanced news. I think people have...
But they can embed journalists.
They can embed journalists, but people have the choice to decide what news to support. And my argument is to support the very best of it and the news that does provide some depth and does make them better citizens rather than the news that just amuses them.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I think we said that. I think we all said that. I think it's really true, though, because we do have those options. Hopefully, everybody out there's got a computer. You know, I worry about that because some people still, you know, don't. Quite frankly, it's expensive.
One third.
Is it that many folks?
Still,
That was a
I
quarter,
just
maybe.
checked it the other day.
Yeah, right, and that's significant. That gets left out of all this.
Tremendous.
You know, we talked about all the options that we have. If you don't have a computer, you don't have those options, and then you are stuck if you just have a basic television with 4 channels, which seems so antiquated. But I had a good friend of mine, actually, I worked with M&F until like 6 months ago. She succumbed to get cable. I couldn't believe she hadn't, but she hadn't. And she basically had PBS, which she watched all the time, you know, and then the regular channels. She'd always hear about Jon Stewart and Keith Olbermann, but she finally got to branch out. But yeah, I mean, I think that, again, and by the way, we're lucky to have still 2 newspapers here in town, you know. There's a lot of places that
2 dailies.
2 daily newspapers, exactly.
Don't forget the
We have the weeklies, of course.
Don't forget your own
Please.
weeklies, buddy.
No.
Yeah.
Or we have websites that have a lot of stuff out there. But I mean, but the 2 daily newspapers, a lot of cities do not have two, and I've always considered that a plus since I've lived here. In the 10 years I've lived here, I come from San Francisco, where we barely have one in the San Francisco Chronicle, quite frankly.
No, some don't have one anymore. So.
Yes, yeah. So make the most of it.
So what we have to do is make the most of it.
We do. I mean,
And we have to realize that just by staying with Fox or MSNBC or CNN, we're not necessarily getting everything that all the viewpoints.
No, and we need to.
Sometimes you have to get a little bit older and to appreciate harder news. There's a value to knowing things when you're sitting around the water cooler and the boss is listening. And one day, younger people realize, gosh, I can't have a conversation with the boss because I don't know anything that he wants to talk about. So you start to read the newspaper, you start to have a better conversation with the boss, and hopefully you move up in the work. So there's a value down the road to doing it. Maybe 18-year-olds are not the kind of, in their life where they read a fair and balanced portion of news. They're busy having fun and doing those kinds of things. Maybe at the age of 50, we just start to be a little bit better at reading and doing things like that. So, maybe newspapers aren't going to be the answer for young people. Maybe eventually, as they get older, it will be.
Mm-hmm. And I do believe I think all of us, at least at some level, know the difference between news and opinion. But when we start thinking about information or thinking about issues and looking at information, it wouldn't hurt to remind ourselves that what this person is saying is not based on really any fact at all other than what that person says. It's an opinion. And that there are publications and there are areas to go where you can get
I think they should have like the cigarette warning on them,
That's right. This opinion can be, these opinions can be dangerous to your health.
This is only an opinion, folks.
Pregnant women
And it can be. It can be very dangerous to you at the voting booth because this may or may not be true. Mm-hmm. Just remind you of that little factor. But I think that needs to be repeated by a lot of people. Although I have talked to a lot of people recently who say they don't trust our media. So every morning they go bbc.com. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you heard this?
But I hear that. But a lot of times what people are talking about is they don't trust the editorial content of our media. When you read the actual news stories, I don't find that much to argue about. Right. It's the editorial content. So I think there's some confusion between what is editorial and what is news.
Yeah, but for the last several years I've noticed a trend towards editorializing even the news with just different little things they do, like even describing the guy's nod or something like this. Just something that you shouldn't really be doing, and there's some little sort of slant. You can feel it in that. And it's not necessarily on the editorial page. I mean, am I wrong?
I don't know. I believe we've learned to read a lot of stuff in the news that might not be there.
Oh, you think I'm reading it in there?
You might be, Louise.
God, and I have a journalism degree from your school, for heaven's sakes. Okay. Thanks so much for tuning in. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys, for coming and talking about media and who controls it. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Ever think what would happen to your pets if something happened to you? The ASPCA already has. They have everything that you need to know about emergency pet preparedness right on their website. And remember, there is no better friend you can have than a pet you adopt at a local animal shelter. If you love animals as much as I do, you will want them to have a long and happy life. Right, Chubby? Wow.
1 in 8 Americans is struggling with hunger. Who's the 1 in 8 in your life?
you can help. Find your local food bank at feedingamerica.org/1in8.